as we speak right now, there are 200 people occupying Trump Tower in New York City because they are demonstrating against the detention and removal process to deport a green card holder who has been organizing and carrying out protest in support of Hamas, a known terror group that wants to wipe out Israel off the face of the earth, a group that has killed Americans. And he's here as a green card holder, which is a privilege, not a right. He is speaking out against America and supporting a group that has killed Americans. They have said, look, you're here as a guest. You're here as a privilege, not as a right. And we don't want people here that are politicking against our foreign policy and supporting groups that kill Americans and advocate killing Americans. And they're there protesting. Now, what he's actually said, I can't speak to. I've not seen what they say are the things he's handing out, the flyers, the pamphlets, all of this. I can't speak to that personally because I haven't seen it. All I know is what I have seen and read in the press, which I don't ever trust until I see some of the documents myself. But we have people like that that are citizens of America. When I say that absence of critical thinking, I've seen Gays for Gaza banners 12 feet long. I just think, my God, why don't you march into Gaza with that and see how tolerant they are? Whereas you can march down the street in Israel with that and people would fall in behind you. You cross into Gaza, you wouldn't make it 30 feet before you would be dead. I don't get how they don't think through that. They talk about Israel being an apartheid state. My God, have they looked who sits on the courts? Are there any Israelis living in Gaza, let alone holding office?
You know which Israelis are living in Gaza? The ones they took hostage, who they're starving and torturing and beating and who they've killed a number of. Those are the only Israelis. Those are the only Jews living in Gaza, the Jews that they stole and kept there and imprisoned there for well over 500 days. And to anyone that calls Israel an apartheid state, they really need their head checked. Because if you think, where are Arab gays most free in the Middle East? State of Israel. Where are Arab women most able to be educated and free and live free lives and go out unsupervised in the Middle East? State of Israel. So the idea that Israel is the problem in that region is insane. Israel is the solution, not just to that region, but to many of the problems that the world is facing. And when you talk about Mahmoud Khalil, this guy who's been arrested and detained, there is a lot to say about him. And as it's going through the courts, one doesn't want to second guess exactly what we know about him. And a lot of it is, as you say, reported in the media, and it needs to be verified. But he was certainly a prominent figure in those Columbia protests. Despite having graduated, he was seen last week negotiating on behalf of students and who barricaded themselves inside Barnard College, Columbia's women's college. And he was seen holding a megaphone and reprimanding the university president. So this is certainly someone who's very active with that. And as you say, being a green card holder doesn't give you exemption from behaving correctly. In fact, quite the opposite. You're basically on probation. It's not citizenship. I know that a large number of green card holders, something like 15,000 a year on average, lose their green card for various reasons. So the idea that he could lose his for this is certainly not unthinkable. And I think that it's extraordinary that the left has this kind of automatic defense of him. And I'm sorry to make it a left-right thing, but it does seem to be that way. Donald Trump, whether one likes him or not, whether one voted for him or not, was elected in no small part due to his promise to crack down on campus extremism and to punish violent Hamas supporters who were disrupting not only university life, but also major US cities. And he acted swiftly on that promise through his executive orders. He's encouraged the administration to use every available tool to hold rioters accountable. And this is what we're seeing happening now. His political opponents, however, are opposed to that, I think, because Donald Trump is doing what he said he would do, because they don't want to grant him a victory in that. But this shouldn't be about petty politics. America is a wonderful country, and one where if you do show support for terrorism, or if you do disrupt the lives of Jewish students on campus, or if you do engage in behavior that is illegal in any way, and I say if, I don't know the details of what Mahmoud Khalil has and hasn't done, we'll find it out. But if you do, of course, the law should take effect. This is not about freedom of speech. Freedom of speech doesn't give you a license to do whatever you like and to bully and to persecute other people, not Jews, not anyone.
No, and I suppose it's a narrower lane if you are a guest in this country, a green card holder, a visa holder, but you don't have that right if you're an American citizen. You can't incite people to violence. You can't incite people to the overthrow of the government or to violence and supporting terror groups that interfere with the foreign policy of the country. That's not part of your First Amendment protections. There are limits to that. I just find it really shocking that people aren't stepping back and thinking, okay, wait a minute, what is it I'm fighting for here? What is it that I'm trying to protect here? And is this something that makes good public policy? Because our laws flow from good public policy. And Israel, they talk about Israel being apartheid. We have Arabs in the judiciary putting Jews in prison, and they say this is an apartheid state. How?
Putting presidents and prime ministers, former presidents and prime ministers have gone to jail. I forget whether it was a president or a prime minister who an Arab judge put in jail. That doesn't tend to happen in many countries by any judge, but in Israel by an Arab judge. So, of course, Israel's not perfect, by the way. I know you wouldn't say it, I wouldn't say it. All functional states, especially democracies, go through massive divisions and tensions, and Israel's no different. In fact, Israel has some massive challenges to deal with. But I think that, these slurs of apartheid and genocide as well, the other one, all of these things, they have real meanings. And I think that the people that try to use them as weapons against the state of Israel, often because it is the Jewish state, and I'm not ashamed to say that. People say, oh, you always try and deflect it by saying, oh, it's the Jewish state. But it is, I think, a great motivation for many people for that animosity towards the state. Because if they actually evaluated it on the facts and what's going on, they wouldn't be so unbridled in their hatred towards that country. But whatever the reason, these words have meanings, and those meanings are clearly not applicable to Israel, the state of Israel, what it's doing. It may get things wrong, as I said, and I think especially during wartime, there are often instances where things go wrong, but it's more about how a state tries to engage in its war and deals with things that go wrong when they do, if they're identified and investigated. So those are the important things to focus on as well. And I think that in terms of the US and the UK, it's been really baffling and utterly depressing for many of us to see the sort of tide come in of people who just threw out their critical thinking, as you said. They just cast it aside and just went for these knee-jerk reactions, often with very little knowledge of what they were talking about. I mean, some of these activists and protesters who've made themselves very visible, very vocal, speak from a position of unique ignorance. They know nothing about the region. Many of them have never been there. Many of them have never met Israelis and Palestinians. Many of them just seem to get involved because it's the current cause du jour. But I think that if people are encouraged to listen to a variety of voices from all sides, and to evaluate things for themselves, we'd be in a much better position, because I think people will understand it's a complicated situation, but certain parts of it aren't that complicated. There is no compromise to be had with a jihadi organization that wants to wipe out Jews. It's not like you can negotiate with that and say, well, okay, just wipe out half of us and that'll be fair. It doesn't work that way. And I think that Israel doesn't have the luxury of coddling people in the way that perhaps some Western countries have done in their misrepresentations of what's going on. Israel's a country that's been fighting for the last 17 months absolutely an existential war on several fronts. And one of those fronts has been this information or propaganda war, which the terrorists have been assisted in by large parts of the Western media, who've absolutely credulously repeated propaganda and nonsense that's been fed to them. And then if questioned, they say, well, Israel wouldn't let us into Gaza, so we unquestioningly take the word of the terrorist organization who fed us this information. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. They could do some work to try and spread actual knowledge and understanding of the region, but they're definitely not doing that in many cases.